And I think with respect to medicine, we all know somebody who's been afflicted with a severe disease of some kind or who's died of a severe disease. And so there's a deep and sincere desire to make an impact that will help people. I'm on the nonprofit academic side of medicine, right? We don't make real medicines. That requires investment, it requires infrastructure. So that's what the topic is today.
And Thomas.
The question is, why am I in science, in medicine?
Yeah, well, why you decided that this is the area you want to be investing in?
It is one of the most important things to everyone, and it is one of the most interesting areas to study and research. I mean, when you're going into school and you're studying people and you're studying yourself, you're learning everything about what is going on in someone's body, and it is an amazingly fast-paced space. I started medical school in 2012. I did an MD, PhD, and then I was fortunate enough to have been investing while I was in school and actually went to build my own firm out of medical school. When I started in medical school in 2012, there were really only 4 types of lung cancer. That's it. Now, it's really 12 years later, there's now 30 types. That's how fast the pace is moving into personalized medicine. So in another 10 years, it's going to be specific to each person. And so we're in a time where it's the most rapid pace of innovation we've ever seen, and people are just expecting it. That's the most interesting part. People just expect it to get better, and that's really interesting.
When we look at some of the areas you're interested, let's take CRISPR technology, which I'm going to use a really basic way of explaining it, and you're going to probably kill me for this. Taking molecular scissors to DNA, gene editing in a sense. And now this is something that was developed, I think at this stage, probably decades ago, and yet the applications are still quite limited. Sickle cell disease, maybe. Why is it that we're not seeing a technology like that being used more?
No, so I would push back. So the first gene editing experiments were done in human cells in '93, and then CRISPR was reduced to practice in a test tube in 2012, and then in human cells in 2013, and then the first approval was about a year and a half ago. So 10 years in medicine is actually quite a short amount of time if you consider all the regulatory processes and clinical trials and all that. So there's probably 30 or 40 clinical trials happening right now that'll be likely approved over the next couple of years, and that's just the start. I would envision let's say 200 or 300 in the next 10 years.
Why does it take so long? This is the fundamental question people will ask. You see breakthrough innovations in the newspaper and you think, fantastic, there's a cure for cancer, there's a cure for something. And then it takes, as you say, years or decades for that to actually reach a patient. Why is that? And is this something that can be reduced?
I hope so. I mean, this is the biggest problem in medicine, is the time from discovery to hitting patients or impacting patients. And so I'm not a regulator, but if smarter folks than me can think about ways to increase access to medicine for patients, that's from a scientist perspective, awesome. The critical thing is to make sure it's safe so you don't lose trust in medicine.
Do you think there has to be any changes to the trial process to speed it up, or do you think it has to be as long as it is for safety reasons?
No, I'll help you. He invented a new form of gene editing, which he should talk about. But generally, the question is, everything takes 20 years. And everyone here is in different areas. Some probably are in medicine or science. But the true innovation hits that curve 20 years later. So the first human genome was sequenced 20 years ago. Now we're going to start seeing everyone's getting their full genome sequenced because the cost went down. When CAR T therapy or cell therapy came out, 20 years ago now you're starting to see patients treated, and it's this classic thing. So every time a cancer drug is made, 20 years later, those drugs are repositioned into autoimmune drugs for autoimmune diseases. And so there's just a general fact pattern. On the regulatory side, what matters to everyone, and I think this needs to be changed, it needs to be changed, in the US for sure, and I think other places are doing different types of, not experiments, but different processes, is the role of the FDA, for instance, was always about safety. What matters is safety. And what has happened and what's cost a lot of money is the focus has been on efficacy, where they're saying, how well does a drug work, and should we approve a drug that we're not sure how well it works? Well, the truth is, as long as the drug is safe, that's what's most important. And the numbers don't lie. It's a difference between a type 1 and type 2 error. Type 1 error is what they should focus on, safety. The US, we lose, and it's unfortunate, but maybe, about 200 people to safety issues in trials a year. But, we lose tens of thousands to not getting treatments that are out there, that are available. And the lung cancer example, to bring it back to that, Keytruda is a drug that's been around for a long time. It works really well. It still is going through different clinical trials when in reality, for most patients, it should probably be a first-line treatment.
Can I give an example? So in the context of neurodegeneration, you could establish safety rules within 6 months. You're not going to establish efficacy rules for 20 or 30 years, right? So it's likely you have to intervene in your 60s or 70s and then see the outcome in your 80s or 90s.
As an investor, is it challenging given the length of this process?
The length is less of an issue. The cost is more of an issue. And it's become prohibitively expensive to develop drugs. And it's always been intriguing to me. Everyone is talking about this DeepSeek, right? The DeepSeek AI that's being done in China. But what's fascinating about that, as an investor, what matters is that's been happening 100,000 times a year in biotech and in therapeutics and drugs in China, where they're kind of taking American or US innovation and then selling it back to the US at 1/50th the cost. And I just found it interesting that DeepSeek happened, and that's what's happened in our world every single day. And so it's just the cost. We can't afford to run these trials. It costs $500 million to $1 billion, and in China they don't. They could run the trials much faster.
Is this something you feel from the academic point of view? I mean, the talent, I'm sure, is in the United States and in other countries, but do you feel the challenge is from a regulatory perspective in terms of being able to get that out?
I mean, as a scientist, we show what's possible, and then the regulators figure out how to extend that. I guess I'm not entirely sure on the question. Is the question like, do I feel competition with China? Like, we build off what, from a scientific discovery perspective, all knowledge is good, right? And so the more we do, the more we can do, right? And so I don't view China as a problem in any way. We're all building global knowledge.
You don't worry that the work that you do could be used by anyone else?
Well, there's a difference here, right? There's knowledge, there's a global effort in increasing scientific knowledge, and that's something we're all in together. And then there's how do you apply this from a business perspective. So I would separate those a bit.
What do you think investors should be looking at right now? What are the exciting areas to invest in?
Well, the first summit I was here, I think I was in this room or maybe a different room, but that was, 4 years ago, and that's where we talked about Ozempic being the next big thing. I think the next big thing, and I kind of mentioned it, is the data sets, the sequencing data sets. Most of the populations that we have data on are Scandinavian populations. And when you look at different groups and different ethnic groups, they have different rates of disease unrelated to their diet. And if you look at folks from for instance, you look at a place like India, and there's a lot of different groups there, but one thing that's a big issue in India is diabetes. But if you were to take someone who's from Indian descent and someone like me, my family's Irish descent, that person with the same diet will have 4 times the rate of diabetes. And we don't know why, because we don't know the information. And that's true of hypertension in East Asia, where people will say, oh, it's due to high salt or due to that doesn't make any sense. We eat a lot of salt. I eat a lot of salt. So we don't have any data. So now that you're sequencing your whole genome is now $200, right? $200, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper. And that data is so important because it changes behavior. And for instance, when you carry a disease, you carry a gene for each disease, like it changes your behavior. A lot of these diseases are caused by a carrier effect. Everyone here has heard of sickle cell disease, I imagine sickle cell disease. And if you carry one copy, it protects from a certain type of malaria. But it also has some downsides. You can't go to high elevation. There's certain issues, with clotting in blood. But that's true of everything that you carry. So My sister carries a disease that if she does drink alcohol or she does smoke cigarettes, she's going to get that disease. It's called A1AT. My dad carries a disease called hemochromatosis. So if he drinks, he's going to get liver disease. So this is not a cost. This is not making me money. This is going to change the world as people are informed about it. Why hospitals aren't doing it, even the ones in Boston where I live and where my wife is a physician, like you'll come in with a disease, you'll be diagnosed with a disease, for instance, and they will just not sequence you. But that disease that you have is likely a disease that someone in your family is going to get, whether it's your child or grandchild. And so it's all about giving people information. And there is an example of this changing the world. If you look at a disease called Tay-Sachs, it was one of the most common diseases. And it's a disease in Ashkenazi Jewish folks. And in the mid-90s, there was a test just for that disease. And rabbis actually started sequencing people ahead of getting married, and that's done in some of the region here, depending, and in some other countries. But that disease went from the most common disease to basically one in, I think it's so uncommon now we don't see it. And so education, it's not making money, but like that data and then information changes everything. So like that's going to be the most transformative thing people aren't thinking about. It's not a drug. It's going to lead to people, actually living better lives.
It's preventative.
It's preventative, and people want the information. It is so interesting when you look at your data and you figure that out. And people brought up privacy, but you know what? Everyone's on their phone. If someone really wants my sequence, they can take that. Everyone dies of something, so we're all going to have something. And
better to know.
It's better to know for your family, because like then when there is a treatment, your kid will have it, right? We got to think about the future. The future is what matters. That's why people like Luke and I go into medicine and science, because it's actually about that. And at the end of life, like when you're seeing patients, what matters is their family. That's all people talk about. And so like we should be thinking about how to prevent that. And as an investor, that information will help make better drugs. And so it's kind of a flywheel of positive feedback.
I want to get back to the data, but first of all, in the audience, put your hand up if you have had your genome sequenced. You gentlemen? Have you had your genome sequenced?
I have. But that's the same number when I talked about Ozempic. It was even less. I just think I have. That's how I know this information.
Okay, so I did it for CNN, I did it for a show, and I did it here in Dubai, where actually you can get it done really easily. And it is helpful because I know what sort of diseases I'm more likely to get, and I have changed my diet accordingly. But who should hold the data? I mean, out of all the people that have had their genome sequenced, is everyone going to be happy if the data was centralized?
So maybe I can highlight a slightly different topic. So part of the problem with where we're at in 2025 is that we have a lot of genes we don't know very much about. So if you get your genome sequenced, you'll see results, but it still remains a challenge to translate that into actionable items for complex human disease. So let me give you a specific example. I'm not an MD, I'm a scientist, right? But I frequently will go to clinical tumor boards where you'll have whole genome sequencing for pediatric cancer patients. In this context, it was brain cancer. And I sat through a session recently where there were 10 patients discussed, and there was no molecularly approved therapeutics for any of these 10 children. And so they were given radiation or chemotherapy. So that's the problem today. That is why I got into medicine.
Tell us about the work you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I'm building tools to better understand gene function. So we can't go, it's very, very difficult to go straight from a genome to a therapy. You have to understand how those genes work and work together.
And you're not just looking at CRISPR technology, are you also looking at the epigenetics?
So I work on two areas. One is using CRISPR to directly impact genes where we don't actually need to understand how they function, we just directly turn them on or off. I also work in the context of oncology on small molecule traditional therapeutics for various reasons. So.
The area of epigenetics, the ability to influence the genes that we have, has become incredibly popular and certainly has been embraced, I'd say, by the biohacking longevity community, Brian Johnson, who's going to live forever. And I'm curious to know what you both feel about this area. People taking healthcare, and particularly kind of preventative healthcare, I suppose, into their own hands, taking handfuls of supplements alongside diet changes.
I mean, what I care more about is health span than lifespan. I feel like most people want to live into their 90s in a healthy manner where you can enjoy your family and you can travel still. And I think if you could avoid chronic diseases that are debilitating, that would be a big step forward for humanity.
Do you think this is the way to do it, though?
I think, to me, like eating healthy and avoiding certain things like too much sun, too much tobacco, too much alcohol is an easy step for most of us. And then past that, I mean, of course, nutritional supplements are important. We no longer die of rickets or things like that, which are like vitamin disorders. Beyond that, I think it's still a work in progress.
Thomas, I know you have some opinions on this.
It's
He's trying to work out how to
how
respond.
about this? The hype to fact ratio is disproportionate, and it's the hope that often kills, and that's the strategy with a lot of discussions about whether it's longevity or psychedelics or AI in medicine. I mean, the AI thing, we don't even have data on people, so those AI actually requires good data, and I'm telling you we don't have it. So I think people should focus on being happy. Like that's part of the issue. Is like when you see patients and they have something, and they, I'm saying this, in a way that's just true. It's like if they wanted to go smoke a cigarette and that's going to change their life, they might live a little longer having that cigarette than not. And so like putting yourself into a prison to potentially live a year longer, like it's not necessarily going to make you happy. And like that's what's important. Like that's what matters. And so if you try to live a healthy life, you should try to live a healthy life. There's a lot of different data. When I was born, my wife and I just had our first baby. And when we were born, every doctor says, oh, you got to lay the baby on their belly. And, but no, now you got to lay the baby on their back. And so these things will change. And so the most important thing for the medical community and folks like Luke is to give people the best information they have and let them make their own decision. People tend to do the right thing. The example with, Tay-Sachs is one. And you need to empower folks to do that. And if people want to, I'm a libertarian in essence, so if people as adults want to spend money and do these types of things, it's completely fine. But I don't, the most likely way you're going to live forever is this, you're something where you're having, this is science fiction, but probably the reality. The real way you live forever is like at a certain age, you'll get an implant, probably at a very young age in your brain. As you're growing older, that implant will map out the brain in real time, and it will actually be connected externally to a computer. That's the only way to actually save your conscience, your mind and your soul. Your body can live a long time. We can keep people alive in the hospital a long time. That's not life. And so that's the real future, is like you'll transfer kind of your consciousness to a computer over time. And that sounds science fiction, but maybe not in our lifetime, but that's likely, that's living forever, because what people, when they say they live forever, what they mean is that their mind lives forever, their connections, their family. It's not like your body. And I think a lot of this focus is because we as humans pay attention to the world. I say that as an American. I know people can't point to a lot of countries in America, but like I think a lot of Americans can. This is the first year ever in the world, and I've said this earlier in another group. This is the first year ever in the whole history of humankind, whatever 100,000 years of Homo sapiens, that more people on Earth are overweight than underweight. That's completely transformative. That is going to change how everyone thinks, and that's why you hear people talking about this. That's why you have people in Europe and the US talking about it, and the rest of the world is going to start talking about it as well. Because when you don't have food in certain countries or certain places, there's no reason to focus on that, because any type of sustenance is better than nothing. It's kind of like an altruistic nature that humans have. They're going to turn their mindset in a different direction now that the food problem is not a problem.
There's so much money being invested in, say, longevity. I mean, I've lost count of how many different types of NAD-related supplements.
There's a lot of money in these meme coins, too.
There's a lot of money. I mean, because there's a lot of money swishing around in all sorts of areas that perhaps some of us feel maybe is overdone. How can we get more investment directed into the innovations that matter, in your opinions, in this area, given they've got quite a long time to develop?
Well, no, everything, that's why science is so great. And people know the Lernian Hydra. It's like this Greek myth where you cut off one head and another head pops out. And that's what science is like. Gene editing started with just the genetics. And then Luke, he developed the first technology that'll go into patients that actually modifies the certain sites on the genes that turn them off or on. So like people didn't know about that initially, really, that component. And so every time you do something, you learn something new. And that's why people kind of feel like science would be stalling, but it's just new discoveries.
What do you hope your technology will be able to do in the future? Best case.
I mean, we just published a paper yesterday showing you could drop LDL cholesterol by 80% with one dose of these epigenetic editing technologies. Where we'll go initially in clinical trials is towards a single-shot cure for hepatitis B. There's 250 million people around the world living with hepatitis B. This is often resulting in cirrhosis and liver cancer. And so if we can impact a large chunk of that, that would be a life-defining achievement for me.
You said single-shot cure, was that it?
Single course cure, yeah.
Single course cure. Now, is that a challenge for governments who are often so much more focused on sort of longer term treatments and reactive?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is, I'm speaking as a scientist here, not as an investor. To me, like, if we can offer single course cures versus like chronic treatment for life, I think that's a big step forward. Pharma loves to keep people on things forever. As a scientist, I don't think that's the optimal approach.
I'm not pharma for anything. I build companies, we try to, like this company, like a single shot cure for hepatitis is what you actually need to end that disease. It's mostly disease in Asia. But often when people think there's something in this, so for instance, I had an argument last week with a very well-known person about why there's no HIV vaccine or why there's not better antibiotics. And the reason is because the current antibiotics are so good that it's not really needed. There's no market for them. There's certain communities where there's markets. And for HIV, these treatments, as they become manufactured in a better way, people live the same lifespan with the current therapies. And so as those therapies go down in cost, like people around the world who have HIV are going to live the same length of life as anyone else. And so that's why there's not a focus on it. It's just there's no market for it. Often there's no market to make it because there's something there that's actually very good.
Well, I would also add, like, it's hard. You can do the math. Like, it's hard to. It is very valuable to avoid, if you treat a 30-year-old, to avoid them going to the doctor every month for the next 50 years, right? That's a very valuable. For economic reasons. They spend more time at work. They're more productive. They don't worry about things. They're happier, right? And so how do you put an exact price on that? I'm not sure, but I think it's incredibly valuable.
We are at World Government Summit, so I feel like we should probably end looking, and I know neither of you are policymakers, but how would you like to see the private sector and the public sector work better together to bring innovations to patients quickly?
I think there are a lot of alliances already we should be really proud of. The NIH is a good example of a private-public partnership. In the UK, CRUK works with UK Biobank and like all the other national hospitals. So there are existing models. Can we do better? Absolutely. Should we be more efficient? Absolutely. But the system on the research side does work.
Thomas, final words from you.
I think when I first came here, I didn't know what to expect, and coming here and spending time in the region, 4 or 5 years ago, and coming from the U.S., completely changed my view of everything. It was a very transformational experience because I realized just like in South America, there's no telephone poles, right? Everything is cellular. Like here, the innovation has happened so recently and so quickly that they've done things that are much better than the U.S. especially in terms of the lack of bureaucracy and the focus on kind of risk profile. The most important thing for policy is to eliminate bureaucracy and kind of empower patients to make those decisions. The government's job is to kind of serve the people and to give them the best opportunity. So if you were to change one thing, you would stratify trials based on risk. If someone is going to die from disease in a year, let them do whatever is needed. And if someone's going to die in 5 years, give them a little bit of a different risk profile. It shouldn't be one, and that's an easy thing to do. It's super logical. I don't think anyone in the room would disagree. It's not a political thing. It's just when you have a very big bureaucracy, things don't change. And so I think the countries that will show the path forward and help the US will be from this region and elsewhere because they have a blank slate and we don't,
That is a great place to leave it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And I think all of you should get your genome sequenced. You know, if you didn't put your hand up, it's about time.